It's always interesting when you've quit Magic for a long time, and then a mechanic just kind of drags you back into it. I've mentioned before that I quit playing Magic the Gathering around the time that Zendikar was coming out. This wasn't because I didn't like what Zendikar was doing, it was because I was a poor kid who had to make choices on what I was going to be playing, and I traded my then Jund him out deck for a Blackwing deck and moved myself back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't have a rotation, so I thought that would be the cheaper game to play. That was a simpler time. That all said, I came back to Magic the Gathering when Magic the Gathering Arena was introduced to us in full force, and one of the decks that I played that made me just fall in love with the game entirely all over again was the Mutation Station Precon that we were given for free as Arena players. The face card for this was Pouncing Shore Shark that mutates and then gets rid of any creature an opponent controls, throwing it back to your opponent's hand, and it has Flash. But it was that mutate part that made me just so intrigued. The idea of being able to create an ever-growing, just gigantic monster instead of trying to give it equipments or auras or anything like that was so fascinating to me that I just had to play this deck, and it came with lots of other ways to mutate: Insatiable Hemophage, Shittering Harvester, as well as Polywog Symbiote to benefit from these things. The strategy seemed like it had enough support and enough legs to just go in infinite directions with. Little did I know, with a limited card pool and the fact that Magic had abandoned blocks, which was what I had been so used to playing with, there would be a very limited pool of mutate creatures. At a local Target, I did end up realizing that there was actually a mutation precon with Otrimi the Ever Playful, but since I was a new Commander player, I picked this up and I thought this was fantastic. I can now play my favorite mechanic in Magic, outside of what would then become my favorite mechanic, which was Dungeons. I thought this was going to be fantastic, and then I realized I had no idea how to build a Commander deck, and this deck was not built well at all in the first place. It's also $80 now, for some reason. Probably the fact that it came with Deadly Rollick or something. Now that I've got a little more experience under my belt, and I've played a variety of mutate decks, I think I'm ready, after many years, to return to Otrimi and even make this deck build go on hard mode. This is a $15 deck like many other $15 decks. The commander gets to be as close to $1 as humanly possible, and the deck needs to be as close to $15 as we can get it, not including the price of that commander. So let's see if we can go ahead and make something cohesive out of a unsupported strategy that is very parasitic but made me fall in love with Magic all over again. Otrimi the Ever Playful is a Sultai and 3, yeah, you're not paying for that anytime soon, gigantic commander who has Mutate for Sultai and 1, which is much more reasonable. It's got Trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, return a creature with Mutate from your graveyard to your hand. Now, I should probably go ahead and explain the Mutate mechanic real quick. The way Mutate works is it combines the text boxes of all cards that you have stacked up, while keeping the values, the type, the name, and of course the actual power and toughness of whatever card is currently on the top. If your commander is anywhere inside the Mutate stack, then it is considered your commander. So if you see this Dawn Shredder Elk I have on the board, let's say I pay 4 mana, tapping all of these, and I mutate Otrimi on top. I now have a 6/6 Otrimi with Trample, the ability to get creatures from my graveyard to my hand, and the ability to sacrifice itself to get a basic land from my deck into my battlefield. It combines whatever text box is on all of my cards. That is how Mutate functions. If I mutate again and I put the Pouncing Shore Shark here, I can choose whether the Pouncing Shore Shark goes on the top, or I can choose if it goes on the bottom. If it goes on the bottom, then I am keeping the Otrimi's power, toughness, mana value, all that, but I am still gaining the text box of whenever this creature mutates, I can return any creature to an opponent's hand. Now, again, if Otrimi happens to be near the bottom, I am still obligated to use this as a commander, which means if I deal damage with my Dawn Shredder Elk, this is now 2 commander damage coming at you because my commander exists somewhere in this stack. Think of Mutate as literally gluing the cards together. There's another ruling to understand. If somebody blinks your card away and it has Mutate, they enter the battlefield as all separate creatures, meaning that if you build a big enough Mutate stack, you can just blink the stack to create a giant board state and win by turning it sideways. That is an option that you have access to. This is such a fun mechanic to me. It made me restart a whole card game and spend thousands of dollars, which I probably shouldn't have, on Ikoria packs, but that's where most of my triumphs came from, so here we are. Now, with the rulings of this really complicated and dumb mechanic out of the way, I can get into what we are aiming to do with this deck. We are aiming to outvalue our opponents by building a Mutate stack onto creatures that are very hard to kill. We are going to be playing a pseudo-Voltron deck where the Voltron is not the commander, it is these guys right here. These cards all have indestructible or hexproof and are protection targets that Mutate wants to go onto. Mutate cannot hit a human for arbitrary reasons, but we can use non-humans with either indestructible or hexproof. Jungleborn Pioneer makes a blue merfolk creature token with hexproof that is a perfect Mutate target. Silhana Ledgewalker has hexproof and even pseudo flying. Sacred Wolf cannot be the target of spells your opponents control, so it's, hexproof. Elusive Tormentor can become the Insidious Mist, which has hexproof and indestructible and unblockable. There is no better Mutate target in Magic the Gathering than Insidious Mists. Urborg Scavenger grabs the keywords from your graveyard, so it can grab the keywords from old mutated cards. It can also steal hexproof and indestructible from those cards as well. We just exile a card from our graveyard and give its values to the Urborg Scavenger. Troll Ascetic has hexproof and the ability to regenerate. Gladecover Scout has hexproof. Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief does not have hexproof, but it does create a secondary stack of Mutate targets. I'll get into the rules for that here in just a second. Witchstalker has hexproof, and Predator Ooze has indestructible, as well as the ability to amass 1/1 counters on itself. All of these should be able to give you a stable board state that is very hard for your opponents to remove. When your board state is just a single creature, you don't want them to ever have access to removing. On to Ivy, though. This card has very, very interesting mechanics we have to get into. Let's show you how Ivy works real quick so you can understand why this card is useful in this deck. Ivy says whenever a player casts a spell that targets a single creature other than Ivy, copy that spell onto Ivy. So here's what we do. We have a Cold Eye Selkie on the battlefield, and we want to mutate our Otrimi onto the Cold Eye Selkie because we have a couple of mutate creatures in our graveyard that we want access to. Now, Ivy sees that and says, oh, go ahead and copy that spell onto me as well. Now, Ivy is going to be a copy of Otrimi, but because of how Mutate works, we can move that copy however we want. So we create a copy of Otrimi as a Mutate spell, and we choose to put Otrimi under Ivy. That way, Ivy doesn't have Otrimi's name, and the legendary rule will not apply. Now, when Ivy swings with Flying and Trample and Tutu, and our Otrimi swings with Trample and Island Walk because of our Cold Eye Selkie, we will hit our opponents with both copies of our Otrimi, though one of them is not named Otrimi. This will trigger Otrimi twice, giving us access to both of our Mutate creatures from our graveyard. This also means whenever we mutate again onto our Otrimi, Insatiable Hamaphage comes onto Otrimi. Now we make a copy of Insatiable Hamaphage that goes on top of the Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief and triggers this ability again. Because Insatiable Hamaphage says whenever this creature mutates, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. Now, instead of burning our opponents for 2, we will be burning our opponents for 4. Now, this does also create fun scenarios where Ivy can be copied, and you can create a token copy of Ivy with all of the text box of all of the Mutate cards that you have stacked up so far. But this will not count as individual mutates. Therefore, cards like Insatiable Hamaphage will only give you its ability once when you do this. But it is a strategy you have access to if you would like to use Ivy as your primary commander instead. Apologies for having to break away from the deck list. There are a few times this is going to happen because Mutate is a very complicated mechanic that just needs to be honestly laid out for you. Speaking of honesty, we're going to run some recursion in this deck as well on top of our commander. Honest Retstein is one of them. When he enters the battlefield, grab a creature card from our graveyard, put it in our hand, and he can even lower the cost of our creature spells by 1, making it easier to mutate. Boneyard Lurker can mutate onto a creature for 4, and whenever it mutates, return a permanent from our graveyard to our hand. We're also going to be running some creatures in here solely because they can mutate and give us additional effects, even if those effects do not work towards any primary game plan, because many of these cards operate off of sheer number of mutates. Insatiable Hamaphage mutates onto a thing and makes every opponent lose X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. Archaepelagor taps things based on the number of times the thing has mutated. Glowstone Recluse gives you a 2/2 counter every single time the creature mutates. Trumpeting Gnar makes a 3/3 green beast token every time the creature mutates, and Brokos Apex of Forever can be cast from your graveyard to mutate onto anything and make it into a big burly boyo. And I know it's hard to kind of see what the strategy of this deck is going to be in our core strategy section, failure on my part, but the deck's entire plan is value and outvaluing our opponents. So let's go ahead and get into the draw section where we can start doing just that. We are going to be running a 15-card draw package because we want to see all of our mutate cards as often as possible. We can mutate the Dreamtail Heron onto things to draw cards every time it mutates. We can use the Auspicious Sterix to mutate onto a thing and exile cards from the top of our library until we exile the same number of permanent cards as we have creatures in the mutate stack that have mutated. Then, when we do that, we put all of the permanents from those cards onto the battlefield for free. The Sea Dasher Octopus gives any creature that is mutated this onto it the ability to draw you cards when it deals combat damage to an opponent, and Mind Leecher, whenever it mutates, exiles the top card of each opponent's library face down, and then you get the ability to play those cards. We're also going to run some evasive creatures that can draw us cards that are good pseudo targets for mutate. Looter Ilkor draws us cards and discards cards when he punches. Cold Eye Selkie draws cards equal to the power of Cold Eye Selkie when she punches, and Shadowmage Infiltrator has Fear and draws us cards every time he punches somebody as well. These are all fantastic cards to mutate onto because even though they don't have the protection of the other cards, it is still easy to just make a 6/6 commander that is punching repeatedly, burning your opponent to death. We'll use Lead the Stampede and Grizzly Salvage to dig through our deck for creatures and lands and put them into our hands. Eureka Moment draws us 2 cards and drops a land onto the battlefield tapped. Polywog Symbiote will draw us a card and discard us a card every single time we mutate, and also makes our mutate cost 1 less. Season of Growth will draw us a card every time we cast a mutate creature while mutating, because any spell that targets a creature we control will draw us a card. Satyr Wayfinder can find us a land from the top cards of our deck and then be a great target to mutate onto later as well. Relentless Pursuit grabs 4 cards from the top of our library and grabs a creature and land from them and puts them into our hand. And Lifecraster Bestiary lets us scry lots of times and also draw a card if we pay 1 mana whenever we cast a creature spell, which a mutate creature is always a creature spell, regardless of if it is mutating or if it is not. Ideally, these should be enough to dig through our deck for lots of answers, not counting the times we're going to use our commander to get answers back to our hand, but that's not all we can do to win a game. We do need to make sure that our opponents are on the back foot, so let's talk about removing their cardboard so that we can win with our cardboard. We're going to be running a 14-card removal package here with as many of the mutate cards as we can find that let us do just that. Cavern Whisperer makes every opponent discard a card whenever we mutate. Chittering Harvester makes every opponent sacrifice a creature whenever we mutate. Dirge Bat makes every opponent get to destroy a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls whenever we mutate this thing. Sovereign Snatcher steals artifacts from our opponents whenever it mutates forever. Gem Razor blows up artifacts and enchantments from our opponents whenever we mutate. And Pouncing Short Shore Shark can bounce any creature back to its opponent's hand whenever it mutates. We'll also run the protective counter spells of Negate, Refute, and Sinister Sabotage, as they either cost low amounts of mana or can be used to help us dig through our deck. Let's also make sure that some of our removal can be mutated onto, like Reclamation Sage, which blows up artifacts and enchantments, or Trigon Predator, which does that while also being a flying creature, which is a fantastic way to get in there, do some damage, hell, even get lots of commander damage in with Otrimi. Then we have Binding the Old Gods to get rid of any problematic permanent and also ramp, Putrefy to get rid of an artifact or a creature at instant speed, and Death Sprout to blow up a creature while also getting a land from our deck and throwing it onto the battlefield. Let's also make sure we've got some board wipes in here, with Gaze of Granite being able to blow up all non-land permanents with mana value 3 or mana value X or less. This card can be used to clean up problematic board states super quick, and because our commander gets our mutate cards back from our graveyard, it doesn't really hurt us that much, as we have a recursion commander built into our deck. Then we have Find Finality. This can be used as a recursion piece, but it can also put 2/1 counters on our commander, and then give every other creature -4/-4 until end of turn, being a pseudo board wipe in most scenarios. So that's 16 cards with the ability to recur a lot of them that can stop our opponents from winning the game. But we do have a problem, and that is that our deck has lots and lots of mana costs in it. Our commander costs 6, for God's sake, so we need to make sure that we're able to play those cards. So let's go ahead and talk about ramp and mana so that we can afford playing this game. We're going to be running a 13-card draw package, trying to lean as heavily into creatures that draw us as we can at our budget. But we're going to start out with Migratory Greatthorn. This card, whenever it mutates, we grab a basic land from our deck and throw it onto the battlefield tapped. That is a fantastically recurable ability that can put us really far ahead of our opponents if we can get this off multiple times. Clifftop Lookout gets us a land from the top cards of our deck and throws it onto the battlefield. Farhaven Elf grabs a basic land from the deck and throws it on the battlefield. Wood Elves grabs a forest from our deck and throws it on the battlefield, and all of them are fantastic targets to be mutated onto later in the game. Dawn Treader Elk, Font of Fertility, and Wayfarer's Bauble are all basically the same card. They can sacrifice themselves to get a basic land from the deck and throw it onto the battlefield. Rampant Growth can grab any basic land from the deck and throw it on the battlefield. Search for Tomorrow does the same thing, but we can play it on turn 1 due to its suspend cost, making it a fantastic turn 1 play. Growth Spiral draws us a card and throws a land onto the battlefield. Explore does the same thing. And finally, we have Parcel Beast, which can mutate for a low cost of 2 and give us the ability to look at the top card of our library, and if it happens to be a land, we just throw it right onto the battlefield. This is super good because this gives us a 2-mana way to re-trigger all of our mutate abilities while also being able to dig into our deck and either draw or get lands. Speaking of lands, we are going to be running 5 forests, 4 swamps, and 3 islands. You may run out of basic lands with these low counts though, but we do still have plenty of dual lands to get into. We have the non-tapped ones of River of Tears, Overflowing Basin, Darkwater Catacombs, Tainted Isle, Sunken Hollow, and Tainted Wood. Then we have the tapped ones of Haunted Mire and Tangled Islet. These ones, while they come into play tapped, they are forests, so they are searchable with Wood Elves, which makes up for that. The Golgari Rot Farm and the Simic Growth Chamber can be used to reset our utility lands later in the game, so they make up for their tapping. And then we have the Temples of Temple of Malady and Temple of Mystery to give us access to our colors while also being able to scry early in the game. I don't know how warmed up on these temples I actually am, but people seem to like them, and they do help us get to our mana, so... Next, we're going to be running 8 fetching lands. The Blighted Woodland and the Myriad Landscape both allow us to ramp into our deck. And then we have the Shire Terrace and the Promising Vein, which operate as basic mana, but can also be used to filter into other mana later in the game if we need different mana pippings. Then we have your standard Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wild, and Escape Tunnel, as these give us access to all of our colors while also being a fetching land. And then the best fetching land we can have in a 3-color deck, Foreboding Landscape. This thing can be cycled if we have too many lands in our hand. It can grab any basic land from our deck. It can also just operate as mana at the same rate as a standard non-tapped land. The thing is fantastic, and you should run more of these in your decks. We'll also have the Omni lands of Command Tower and Exotic Orchard, and the utility lands of Rogue's Passage to make Otrimi get in there, Pit of Offerings to get rid of problematic graveyard cards, and Ominous Cemetery so we can get rid of creatures from our land zone. All in all, that should be enough to dig through our deck and get to what we need mana-wise. But what we need more than anything is a demonstration on how to play this deck, because holy shit, Mutate is complicated. Due to the mana cost of this deck, I would not keep anything lower than a 3-land hand, and I would not keep anything that doesn't have not only a creature to mutate onto, but also a way to get more mana via ramping. Luckily, we happen to have a Lead the Stampede to dig for creatures. We have a Rampant Growth, a Dawntrider Elk, and a Heaped Harvest. We have lots of ways to dig for our lands. So let's go ahead and open up our turn 1 with a Temple of Malady going sideways, scrying this Cold Eye Selkie, and we're going to keep that Cold Eye Selkie. Moving to turn 2, we've drawn the Cold Eye Selkie. Let's go ahead and play this island and tap 2, and let's Rampant Growth to get a swamp out of the deck. Now we have all of our land colors, and we are golden for the follow-up turns. We move into the next turn, and we've drawn a Souvenir Stature. We have a Simic Growth Chamber in hand, so let's go ahead and tap all of these to play our Heaped Harvest to give us one of our lands, and we'll play a Simic Growth Chamber to bounce this swamp back to our hand for a follow-up turn. We move into turn 4, and we're going to go ahead and play our Swamp per turn. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana available. Let's go ahead and start things out. We can use the Gem Razor. So what we're going to do is we are going to pay 1, 2, 3, and we're going to get the Cold Eye Selkie out on the board. This is our first Mutate target we're going to be using, and we have a couple of options. We can use the Lifecaster Bestiary to start our journey of drawing cards. We can crack the Heaped Harvest or play the Dawntrider Elk and crack it in order to grab any of our lands from the deck and ramp up to higher land counts. I think the most important thing we can get right now, though, is access to better draw. So let's go ahead and get that Lifecaster Bestiary on the board and ready to go, and let's pass to our opponents. Next turn, we get to scry 1 before we start, and it's an Escape Tunnel. I'm okay keeping that so we don't miss our land drop. Let's go ahead and play that Escape Tunnel and crack it and get a land out of our deck. Right now, I would like more green mana, so let's get that Forest out. Boom, that's in our hand. Now we have Gem Razor in our hand, which mutates for 3. Let's go ahead and use Gem Razor to get rid of an opponent's card. I'm going to be honest, the most important thing our opponents have right now that I don't want them to have access to, actually, that would mutate for a bad amount. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, we're going to steal somebody's Soul Ring. It's almost a guarantee somebody has one at this point, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're going to pay 6. We're mutating Souvenir Snatcher onto something, and we're stealing somebody's non-creature artifact. If they have a Soul Ring, perfect. We are taking that. If they don't, we are taking an Arcane Signet. Let's just assume we have that on our board. We're not going to use that for mana for anything. We're going to try playing as if we don't have their cards. We're going to punch somebody with a Souvenir Snatcher, which is going to draw us 1, 2, 3, 4 cards, because it is on the Cold Eye Selkie. Now we are in a perfect spot for our next turn. We get to scry the Wayfarer's Bauble. We don't need the Wayfarer's Bauble, so let's go ahead and throw that away and draw this Sunken Temple instead, or Sunken Hollow. We'll play the Sunken Hollow, and looking at where we're at right now, I think our opponent doesn't need one of their cards. Let's go ahead and do 1, 2, 3. Let's put Gem Razor on the top. Now we've got Reach and Trample, and we still have the ability to steal shit, and we have the ability to blow up a problematic artifact. We're taking lots of artifacts and enchantments from our opponents now, and we're going to pay 1 into our Lifecaster Bestiary to... No, we don't even need to do that. We can keep that mana open instead. We can pay 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can Binding the Old Gods to get rid of one of our opponent's cards right now. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 cards we've taken from our opponents now, and punching it with the Gem Razor, we get to go 1, 2, 3, 4 cards deep, and out of all these, I think the Boneyard Lurker is likely the one we don't need, and we don't need the Myriad Landscape at this point in time. So we are golden. We move into the next turn, scrying. We don't need the Font of Fertility, so we'll instead draw up this Honest Rutstein. This can get a permanent from our graveyard back into our hand. So let's use Pit of Offerings to get rid of... Oh, sorry, I'm missing a thing. We also get a forest out of the deck. So let's go ahead and get that Haunted Mire on the board. I forgot that we are getting that off of the Binding the Old Gods. Now, We're going to go ahead and pay 1, 2, and get Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief on the board. Now let's pay 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do it this way. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's mutate Otrimi onto the top here. Mutating Otrimi here will trigger our Gem Raiser, stealing a thing from our opponent, and the Souvenir Snatcher, stealing another thing from our opponent. Well, blowing up a thing and stealing a thing. And we're going to make a copy of the Otrimi, and it's going to go under the Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief. Now we have 2 Otrimis. They have both mutated, and we can go into our graveyard and grab 2 mutate creatures, put them in our hand. We're just going to grab the Boneyard Lurker for now. We don't need more than that. It mutates for 4, so we can't use it at the moment. So let's go ahead and swing with our Otrimi. This is punching an opponent, and it is drawing us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a lot of cards we get to draw. And looking at where we're at right now, I think what I want to do is I want to just dig into the deck and grab more lands for a follow-up turn. So we're going to pay 1 and 2, and we're going to crack the Heaped Harvest and go into our library and grab another land. We also need to figure out what we are getting rid of here. So I think the Mind Leecher is good to go as we have access to Otrimi. We don't need this. We do want this Relentless Pursuit because this will give a creature land card from among them into our... No, we don't need the Relentless Pursuit. We have plenty of draw. Polywog Symbiote will be good, as well as Honest Rutstein for weaving things into later turns. We don't need the Search for Tomorrow right now. We don't need the Dawn Treader Elk. We can probably do without the Lead the Stampede, as we've already drawn so many cards at this point. And, God, we still have to find things to get rid of. Let's get rid of the island, since we'll use the Pit of Offerings on our next turn. And after this, it's probably gonna be the Death Sprout. I don't want to get rid of the Death Sprout so much, but we are about to dig through our deck and get lots and lots of cards. So, we move into turn 7, and we don't need the Evolving Wild, so we're going to throw that to the bottom of the deck and draw this Swamp instead. Now, looking at where we're at right now, we go to our graveyard, and we have the Mind Leecher in here. I probably could have thrown away 2 Mutate creatures, honestly, but we are going to pay 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to mutate the Migratory Greatthorn under the Otrimi, but on top of the Ivy. This means that we'll be able to get 2 lands out, and we've increased the power of our Ivy, and we get to go into our deck, and we get to grab, graveyard, and we get to grab that Mind Leecher that we put in there. So that is here, and we get to go into our deck and grab 2 lands. Honestly, we could have also just played the Polywog Symbiote before doing that, but we have lots of mana open. We're kind of in a golden spot no matter what we do. Binding the Old Gods is dead at this point. So, looking at where we're at right now, I think we just go ahead and swing Otrimi at a person as well as the Ivy. We've taken another artifact from them. We've blown up another artifact because of the Souvenir Snatcher, and we're just trying to draw our cards with Selkie. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards are being drawn with Selkie, and now we're going to make our opponent sacrifice 2 creatures. That's what we're going to do. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana available. Let's go ahead and pay 2 of that mana, and let's get Polywog Symbiote on the battlefield. This will discount the Chittering Harvester down to 4. We get to pay 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's go ahead and put the Chittering Harvester here. It's going to mutate under our Otrimi, but above our Ivy. This is going to give us 2 lands out of our deck. It is going to take another artifact from our opponents. It is going to blow up another artifact or enchantment, and then it is going to make them sacrifice a couple of creatures. So we're getting rid of what? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We are getting rid of 12 permanents from our opponents off of this move alone, because we're making them sack 2 creatures each, so that's 6 permanents, and then we're making them lose an artifact or enchantment each, and then we're stealing an artifact each. So we've taken 12 permanents from them. We have those on our board, not counting what's here and, like, viewable. And because we casted that spell, fuck it. We'll use Lifecaster Bestiary to draw an additional card on top of all of that. Now let's go ahead and view our deck and grab a couple of lands. We get the Swamp out, and we're going to go ahead and get a forest out. Boom. Now, I know that we are assuming that the Otrimi is not getting destroyed. This is just how you have to goldfish, though. You can wipe your board over and over again and just pretend you're playing CDH if you really want, but I like figuring out if the deck has the ability to do its stuff by turn 7 or 8. It does seem to have that ability. I'm golden with it. We've gotten our extra lands out. We have this-ish many lands out on turn 8. I don't even remember if we played a land for the turn. I'll assume that we didn't. We'll just play that Swamp. Boom. There we go. This is where we're at right now for Magic. A Reliquary Tower may be a very good upgrade at this point. Cold Ice Selkie does work, guys. This thing has Flying and Island Walk. It's getting in there. It is hurting a player. Anyway, what would you do if you could upgrade this thing a little bit? If you are going to upgrade this deck, the first thing I would dig for is a Toski Bearer of Secrets. It's a great draw engine like the Cold Eye Selkie was, but unlike the Selkie, it is indestructible, making it really hard for your opponents to get rid of this thing, especially when we mutate on top of it. Vesuvian Duplimancy would also be great as, like the Ivy Lane Spell Thief, it allows us to create more copies of our creatures as we go, and they become non-legendary, so we get to even avoid our problems that we were running into with the Ivy Lane, where we had to mutate on top and bottom and do weird things. Speaking of mutate, the Sawdust Demolisher is one creature we weren't able to fit into the budget of this deck, so you probably should go ahead and throw that in, as it is a Beast Within that we can just use repeatedly as a mutate creature. Speaking of Beast Within, I think that it should be in every green deck, so here it is. Reliquary Tower is also a fantastic card to add in. As you saw, we got a huge hand very quickly, and sometimes holding on to that hand is a good idea in a deck that wants to outvalue your opponents. Speaking of value, let's go ahead and add a Beast Whisperer in to give you access to even more draw as you cast your spells, and let's get a couple more creatures in that are nice and durable. The Barb Servitor is a creature that has to attack repeatedly, but it has draw attached to it as well as indestructible, and the Venom Thrope has Flying Death Touch and Hexproof, meaning that this has every single keyword you possibly could want on top of being able to just get, you know, trample off of our commander. This means your Venom Thrope with Otrimi on it would be a commander damaging, grabbing from graveyarding, flampling hexproof monstrosity. Nobody is gonna want to deal with that shit. And, well, there's my labor of love for the week. I really wanted to make this deck work on a tight budget, and thankfully, nobody but me likes Mutate. So it was really easy to find all the cards outside of a couple at a really reasonable price. That all said, let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. I know I layered things a bit weirdly during the actual gameplay session for the deck, but it's a complicated deck, but it's fun as hell. You should give it a try. And, you know, just don't look up the rulings for Mutate, and you won't have to have a brain hernia. Anyway, thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed, let me know in the comment section below. If you have any upgrades you would want me to do for decks, or just any decks in general you want me to tackle, then please let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you are going to be at MagFest this year, please let me know, as I will be there all weekend. I've got a panel with a friend of mine talking about Sonic the Hedgehog. Hopefully, I will see some of y'all there. That said, thank you all for being here, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full-time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full-time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.